Hello, everybody. I just wanted to show you, this is a picture of me on my first day of work 2 years ago at my tech company. I was like super excited, bright-eyed, and bushy-tailed, and I had to fill out some onboarding forms. One of the onboarding forms included something like this. Do you have any dietary restrictions? And so I had to stop and think about it, mulled it over for a minute, and wrote in grain-free and dairy-free. When I wrote it in, I had some thoughts. I was kind of like, what is HR going to think? Are they going to think I'm some like CrossFitter, or I'm a trendy eater, or I'm trying to lose weight? I just wasn't sure. And I also knew they had constraints. My tech company, like many, feeds us by catering in like kind of large vats of food, and everyone eats the same. It's family style. So I wasn't sure how they were going to be able to accommodate some sort of entirely grain-free diet. And I'm pretty sure they would think this was a choice. Of course, it wasn't a choice for me. It was actually a doctor-mandated protocol, something called the autoimmune paleo protocol. And these were the foods I couldn't eat at the time, which is a really lengthy list, including beans, legumes, nightshades, which includes the spice pepper, seeds, nuts, and dairy. So I was avoiding all of these foods at the time on account of my health. And see, what I didn't tell HR was that while I looked like this at work, this is me at my desk, this is actually on the same day me walking home from work. I couldn't actually complete the 3-block walk from BART to my house, and I collapsed on the sidewalk and had to lay down and rest, and pretty much crawled the way home. This is because I have a chronic illness. And I've had it for 14 years, and back in 2003, I got bit by a tick, and got Lyme disease, a co-infection, and mono kind of all at the same time, which crashed my system. I went from a 2-sport Division I athlete, I swam and played water polo, to being bedbound in a wheelchair and living at home. Over the next 14 years, I went through a variety of treatments. This is me getting intravenous antibiotics while living at home. This picture is one of my treatment protocols from last year. This is the total number of pills that I took in one day. There are 42 pills. And while you're sick like this, you kind of have to do a bunch of different treatment programs to see what works. And so I was constantly swapping out pills. I was constantly going back to the doctor. And you have to monitor things like your heart rate. That's a little heart rate monitor. You have to monitor white blood cell count, inflammation, Lyme count, all of these other sort of trackers that you have to monitor as you change your protocols, which led me to going to the doctor 120 times last year, which is essentially one every 3 days. I went to a specialist. I also get a bunch of fun toys, including this what I call anti-activity tracker. I actually can't have my heart rate go above 110 beats per minute. I'm on a workout ban because it stresses my body too much. So mine actually buzzes when I get above 110, reminding me to calm down. I have it paused right now in case I get nervous. And so a life like this adds up to a lot of paperwork. I spent $18,329 last year out of pocket, on top of my health insurance, on this care. And of course, what you see here is essentially 3 years of medical records, just 3 out of my 14. And what that also amounts to is actually quite a bit of privilege. I have class privilege in that I can pay $18,000 out of pocket. And I also, of course, have racial privilege, meaning when I go into a doctor, they take my complaints more seriously than they would for people of color. And those two together definitely help me, having class and race privilege. Of course, I am a woman, and so there's quite a bit of female hysteria that can get thrown at me, where doctors will be like, oh, you're just depressed, or you're making it up. And so there's, the things that happen outside in the world also happen inside of the healthcare system. There's intersectionality with oppression that occurs as people try to fight for their health. And for me, I don't tell this story very often, and I certainly didn't tell it to my coworkers or HR right away. And I didn't tell it for a bunch of reasons. And one of them is that it's a very long story, and it's pretty complicated. A lot of people like to think about health. They think about you get sick, you take pills, and you get better. But my story is substantially more complicated than that, and it can be very circular. It's also fairly traumatic to retell. If you're really sitting down and talking to me about it, I can get really emotional. It's been really difficult. This is not like an easy thing to talk about, particularly with someone who you are getting a paycheck from. It's also emotionally exhausting, meaning that when I talk about what's happened to me, people often respond in ways that are hurtful because they don't know how to respond, or I end up doing emotional labor trying to comfort them, being like, it's okay, I'm okay, you're okay, we're okay, which is also can be exhausting. I'm often doubted and disbelieved. I think it's because my story is traumatic and long and unusual, people are like, it just can't be true. And I really fear being viewed as incompetent at work. I worry that asking for accommodations, people will equate that with not being intelligent or not being driven. Of course, neither of those are true, but it's really difficult to navigate that space. It also I spend social capital when I ask for things. When you ask for food accommodations or screen protectors or, a place to lay down if I need to quiet my brain. And I often worry that if I ask for all these things and then something else happens, like I feel like I got passed over for a raise or I get sexually harassed at work, that everyone will view me as dramatic or needing attention, and there won't be enough space for me to ask for other things that I need if I've kind of filled up this bucket with accommodation requests. So how this looks like at work is this, when I'm not talking about being ill and I'm not talking about the things I'm dealing with outside, is it creates this kind of crazy confluence where my life outside rolls into my work. So for a very quick story, one morning, it was a Thursday morning, and I was 10 minutes late to a meeting that included my entire team. And I was 10 minutes late because I had woken up 2.5 hours early to drive from Oakland to Stanford, where I'm at a specialty clinic, to get a fasting blood draw, meaning I couldn't eat for 12 hours. And I drove down, and I had one sip of water on the way down, and when I got there, the nurse is like, one sip of water, can't get the blood draw. So I had to drive all the way back from Stanford to Oakland in rush hour traffic. But it made me realize that if I didn't have the blood draw, I couldn't go to the specialist appointment I had in 2 days, which I had made 6 months in advance, which means I had to reschedule it, which means I had to move more work meetings, which is always difficult and painful. It also meant that I wasn't going to get access to the drugs that I needed to lower my inflammation, to get rid of the fevers that I was running consistently at that time. So this one mistake had cost me this kind of cascade of problems that resulted in me feeling sick for much longer than I needed to be. And when I rolled into work to that meeting, I hadn't eaten in 16 hours, and that had been my morning. And then one of my coworkers, helpfully after the meeting, was like, Liz, can I offer you a little bit of feedback? And I was like, sure. And she's like, we can really tell when you disagree with people's ideas. I'm gonna need you to be a little bit more upbeat. And I was like, you know what? I hear you. I haven't eaten in 16 hours. I've had a really rough morning. I'll try. But it made me feel very much unseen and unheard, and that the expectation of being enthusiastic and upbeat was more important than my health. And I'm not alone in this. There's 20% of people who have invisible illnesses or struggle with an invisible disability. So that means 1 in 5 people at your workplace or that actually struggle with this. It could be Crohn's or MS or lupus, traumatic brain injury, PTSD. There's all sorts of illnesses that people grapple with. And this means that even if you don't know about a coworker, an employee, maybe even your boss, this is certainly something that people are struggling with outside. And if you don't know of somebody now, you will. 20% of us in our lifetime will struggle with this, and you might never see or know because you are going to look like me. And you wouldn't know if I was just walking down the street. So what should employers do, and what can you do as a colleague in order to make space and make the workplace more supportive for those who have invisible disabilities? The first thing I would recommend is reaching out. This takes proaction to create enough accommodations in the workplace for people who are chronically ill. This means putting on your intake form space for accommodations and for people to check off what they need. I wouldn't have known that I could ask for a food accommodation if it wasn't directly on our intake form. I also wouldn't have known later that I could ask for a screen protector unless I hadn't talked to one of our engineers who already had one. I would say trust people. So if you are in the place where somebody's asking for an accommodation or telling you about something they need, trust them. Trust them that they actually do need it and help them get it. As I described, talking and asking for accommodations is incredibly taxing for the person who needs them. And so it's important to make sure that you're just saying yes, even if you don't know the reason. And of course, there may be 5% of people who abuse this over time, but there's 95% of people who need it, so let those 5 slide, y'all. Just let them slide. Make time and space. I think this one's particularly important for people with very complicated problems and need a lot of accommodations, and so that would be like making time to check in or sit down with a coworker or an employee if you're HR to make sure that you have time to hear about what they need and to kind of hear a little bit of backstory. Space to make the invisible visible if somebody wants to. I would also say check in. I would recommend some sort of one-on-one consistent check-in with people because often these diseases really change. There'll be a flare, someone will feel very sick for a while, it will disappear. As I mentioned, my protocols change. I did 6 last year, which means I felt pretty differently on each of my medication protocols. And so a constant check-in was needed for me, and I would recommend it for anyone. So let's go back to my food story. I was on this autoimmune paleo diet, and I wasn't getting what I needed in the beginning, and so I was eating what my work was providing, and I started to get really sick. I talked to a friend of mine who was like, you should just talk to HR and ask for more accommodations. I felt like a burden, so it took me a little while, but when I did, HR took me out to coffee off campus to a safe space, and they took me out for 45 minutes, and we talked about how an accommodation could look. And what we ended up with is they ordered me specialty meals from an allergy-free place that actually cooks on my diet called Mission Heirloom, and they got delivered to the office every day, which was awesome. They also checked in with me every 2 weeks. They proactively looked up other caterers and offered me new options in case I got sick of the meal options, and it was like a really incredibly supportive thing for them to do. And so, just a reminder, this is what I looked like. Really hard to tell. One of the things I hear the most is, but you don't look sick, which is true. I don't. But it's hard to know from there that I've gotten 52 vials of blood taken, that I was in bed yesterday for 14 hours and couldn't get out, and that this is something that I manage. And for me, it's really tricky to know if I'm worth it. To be honest, I don't know if the accommodations I need are worth the value that I bring. And that's hard to say because that is true. And I just wish that we were, as tech, I think we can do better. I think we do a really good job of accommodating people with visible disabilities, both because we have Americans with Disabilities Act, the ADA, but we wouldn't think about not putting in an elevator. And I want tech to get to a place where we can have these conversations and accommodate those of us who have chronic illness in the same sort of way. So I'll leave you with this quote, which is be kind because everyone you know is fighting a battle. Thanks.